Well, welcome back to the homestead. In today's episode, we're going to be staining these hardwood floors a special walnut color. Now, we've already gone through the house and we've drum sanded and edged all of the floors up to 80 grit. We've put down a wood filler to fill in any cracks or imperfections in the wood. And we've come over all of that and used an orbital sander to do a final sanding of 80 grit throughout the entire house. And that final orbital sander just gets rid of all the distinguishing swirl marks from the drum sander or the orbital, because they both are a directional, where the orbital is a random. So now that we've got all the sanding marks out, we've gone through the house and we've swept, vacuumed, dust mopped, and now we are damp mopping the floor. And the damp mop is going to get any of the final pieces of sawdust or anything off of the floor, as well as it's supposed to help open the pores of the wood to receive the stain, and puts a little bit of moisture into the softer parts of the wood so that they don't soak up more stain than the harder parts, and you get a more even stain finish that way. So at any rate, we're going to be using Minwax stain, and the color is going to be Special Walnut. And my wife is in the process of finishing the damp mopping right now. And once she finishes that, then we'll be ready to go ahead and start the staining process. All right, so we're just about ready to start putting the stain down. The wet mopping has been completed and the floors have had a little chance to dry out now. So what we're gonna do is we'll stir up our can of stain. We'll pour it in a bucket with this applicator over here. And we're just gonna use a lamb's wool applicator to apply it. So we'll apply a strip of it and then we'll come back with a mop and try and mop that off. And then we'll have to use the hand towels on the very edges. And if that method doesn't work well, then we'll switch to the traditional method where you apply stain to a large area and then you come back with the towels on your hands and knees and wipe it off. But we're going to try using this mop to avoid doing so much kneeling on top of the stain and see how that goes. So let's go ahead and give it a try. right, so you can see behind me, we've got all our stain on the floor and it's dried overnight and it looks really good. I'm very happy with the way it looks down here. Now upstairs is a whole different story. Upstairs, we made probably every mistake you could make and it shows. So first, we didn't start putting the stain down with the grain of the wood. We got excited and we went to a far wall and we were focused on an exit strategy, not making sure we were going with the grain of the wood. So we have a stain pattern that is not consistent along one wall. Secondly, we weren't very rigid about our time, and the stain is supposed to be on the floor for 10 to 15 minutes, and we didn't set an actual timer. So I would stain for a little while and then my wife would come back and wipe it off. And then we'd stain for a little while and my wife would come back and wipe it off. So some spots are lighter and some spots are darker because the stain was on the floor for a different amount of time. And also the start and stop lines are very pronounced upstairs. So we saw that after the first coat was on there and we had a dark spot. And also at one point when we put our applicator down into the stain, it actually touched the bottom of the container and there was some sediment down in the bottom of that from the stain. So there was a lot of pigment on that part. So when we put it on the floor, there is a dark spot in the floor from that concentrated pigment. So we didn't stir our stain enough and we let the applicator hit the bottom of the bucket. All that being said, we tried to come back and put a second coat on there thinking, well, if we put a second coat on, it'll all darken up to the same amount and it'll at least be consistent. It just might be a little darker than we hoped for. We tried that and it didn't work. It's better, but it's not acceptable. So upstairs, I'm gonna have to come back in and sand that back down to bare wood, and then we're gonna start that over and do it right. Now, downstairs, you can see the consistency is really nice in here. This is exactly what we're looking for. So we're gonna go ahead and put the polyurethane downstairs. We're gonna put 2 coats of it downstairs today, and the downstairs will be finished, and we can let that dry and harden up over the week. And next weekend, I can come back in and redo the upstairs. So let me go ahead and take you upstairs real quick and just show you a couple of the issues that we had. And you'll see what not to do and what it looks like if you do that. And then we'll come back down here and we'll start putting the polyurethane on. All right, so this is Nathaniel's room, and you can see there's a line about halfway through the room where this area is darker than this area over here. And then also out along that far wall, there is about a 2-foot strip next to the wall where we first put the stain down cross grain that's a little bit different than this area over in here. So this room is inconsistent and we're gonna have to sand it down and fix it. And some of these things aren't showing up in the camera quite as much as they do in person, I don't think, but I believe you can probably see a line right through here where this area is much darker than what's over here. Now, this is the area where I don't think we had the stain stirred up really good, and then we allowed the applicator to hit the bottom of the container. So all of the pigment that had settled out was on the bottom of that container. And there's a small strip right here and partially into the bathroom here that is much darker. That didn't, as soon as we put the applicator on the wood, that turned really dark. It wasn't that this stain stayed on there too long. So I think that's because of the pigment. All right, and like I said, some of this is not showing up probably in the camera as much as it does to your eye here. So it's not really that I'm being nitpicky. It is noticeable in person. But halfway through the bathroom, you can see the second half of the bathroom is a slightly lighter color than this very first part, because this was put down with the section right outside where it went into the bottom of the container. So we're going to sand all of this down and redo it as well. All right, so here in my office, I think this was more timing issue and maybe a rubbing pattern, I'm not sure. But this side of the room is significantly darker than this side of the room. And then also from the doorway up and over, about a 2-foot strip from the wall is a little bit lighter. So it looks like maybe when we put our stain down, we came back and rubbed around the walls first, and then came back and did the interior of the room, which allowed a time difference. So whatever it is, we've got 3 different shades of the flooring here. I've got a really light strip around the wall. I've got a normal strip out here in the middle of the room, and then this half of the room is darker. So we're gonna have to come back and re-sand this as well. Now, like I said, the method of setting a 10-minute timer and starting to put my stain down and staining for 10 minutes, and then as soon as the alarm goes off, my wife coming back and pulling that stain up and taking 10 minutes to get to where I was when the alarm went off, that worked really well downstairs. The results are very consistent. So we're gonna sand all this upstairs off. We're gonna count this as our learning curve, and we're gonna come back and do it right using the method we use downstairs, and we're gonna make sure the floors are something we're happy with before we put the polyurethane on them. So in the meantime, the downstairs is ready. So we're gonna jump back down there, and we're gonna go ahead and start putting the polyurethane on the downstairs and see if we can't get that finished out today. All right, so this is what I'm going to be using to apply the polyurethane. I've got Minwax fast drying oil-based polyurethane for the floor. I've got a lamb's wool applicator that I'm going to put it down with, and then I've got a watering can here, and I'm just going to mix up the polyurethane, pour it into the watering can, and I'll use the watering can to pour it onto the floor so that I get a control bead to apply with the applicator. So let's go ahead and jump into it. All right, so we finished putting the polyurethane downstairs, and it didn't work. It was a complete and utter failure. The heat had gone out here, and it was in the low mid 40s when I was putting the stain and the polyurethane down, and because of that, it caused a problem with the polyurethane. So evidently the polyurethane is supposed to be put down with the house at the temperature you're going to live in it, around 72 or so. Before I put the stain and the polyurethane down, I thought the temperature should be an issue, just like painting. I read all of the can information that I could find, and I saw nowhere on the stain or the polyurethane that temperature was an issue. So we went ahead and put it down. I think the stain would have been okay. It just took longer to dry due to the colder temperature. We let it dry overnight, but I don't believe that that was long enough. So in the videos where I'm putting the stain down, you can see out in the living room area, there's a few of the darker boards that look like the polyurethane didn't take to those, like it was a dry spot in the floor. What I think happened was that those darker boards had accepted more stain than the other boards just because of the type of grain that they were. And because they had accepted more stain, they were wetter than the boards around them. So when the polyurethane came over, that wet stain, I believe, kind of repelled the polyurethane. Now that's just my guess. I could be completely off on it, but I think that may be what happened. But at any rate, you can also see in the video that the stain looks kind of orange peeled almost, rather than a smooth finish like it should have been. And it also took a significant amount more polyurethane to put down than it should have for one coat. And like I said, I believe that's because the polyurethane was thicker than it should have been because of the colder temperature, and it just wasn't going on as smooth or as thin as it should have. So long story short, we botched the downstairs just like we did the upstairs, but we learned from it. So we have gone through the house now and sanded all of the floors back down to bare wood. We used a drum sander and an edger to sand it all the way back down to bare wood. Then we brought it up from 60 to 80 to 100 grit with the floor sander and the edger, the drum sander and the edger. And then after we had done that and all our edges and corners, we came back with the large pad orbital, and we went over the entire floor with an 80 grit. Now, I don't entirely understand why we went up to 100 grit with the drum sander and the edger, and then we came back and we roughed it up to an 80 with the buffer. But that was the advice of the people at the flooring store that actually finish floors for a living. So I'm taking them at their word, and that's what they said the professionals do, so that's what we're doing. So a few of the things that we are going to change up when we reapply the finish to the floor. One, we've gotten our heat fixed, and our house has been at 72 for several weeks now, so everything is acclimated to the 72 degree temperature, and we're not going to stain or varnish unless the house is at that temperature. So I think that's going to help things in one regard. Now we also mentioned that we had learned that we weren't consistent enough with the way that we put the stain on upstairs, and that caused some unevenness in the finish. And we started timing ourselves. We put stain down for 10 minutes and then pull that stain up and take 10 minutes to pull it up, and we would just roll through doing that. And when we stained downstairs like that, we got a nice even consistency. But after talking to the guy at the floor store, not the floor store, but a flooring store, the recommendation was that a lot of the people now are starting to put the stain down with a floor buffer, a slow RPM floor buffer, so about 175 RPMs, I think. And what they're doing is they're taking a piece of carpet and using that for a pad, and they'll put the stain on the carpet, turn that down on the floor, and then use the buffer to buff the stain into the grain of the wood, and you get a more even application of the stain. And then they come right back behind and they put a clean pad of carpet on the floor, and they run over that to burnish that in and pull up any excess. So they say you get a nice even consistency doing that, and that's what we're going to try. And the nice thing about that is my wife and I, neither one, have to spend the entire day down on our hands and knees. The only reason you have to get on your hands and knees is to do the cut in of the edges and corners and things where the floor buffer is not going to quite get to. So we're going to try that and see if that works better. And then we also got the first time we had purchased Minwax from the big box store and Minwax polyurethane from the big box store, and the professionals told us that the grade that you get out of the big box store is not quite the same as their professional line that the flooring stores sell, so they referred us over to a flooring supply store that sold the, I think it's called a Duracoat, but I'll double check that. But there's a professional grade of Minwax that's a little bit more durable. So we've purchased that for the stain and the polyurethane. And I think that polyurethane is maybe a water modified oil or something. It's not a straight oil, I don't believe. I believe it's called Artisan. But we'll get you more details on that in the next episode where we're actually applying the stain. But for now, that's going to be it for this video. My wife and I are going to finish going through the house and sweeping and vacuuming, and we're going to try and water pop the floor tonight. I'm not going to film that. We're just taking a garden sprayer and spraying a light coat of water over the floor, and then coming back with a microfiber dust mop and rubbing over it to make sure it's spread out evenly. And then we're going to let that dry overnight. We'll come back tomorrow and try and do the actual application of stain. So for now, that's going to be it. And until next time, y'all just keep checking back.